Thank you everyone for coming here, and when I finish, I hope you will still applaud. That being said, let's get on with it. So, it's 2007. No reason, it's 2007. The mad world gets just a little bit madder still. Tony Blair, of all people, is appointed peace envoy to the Middle East. The Harry Potter books are brought to an end. Russia invests millions to plant a flag out in the ocean, but in the North Pole. But this, as a popular song goes, could happen only in India. What happens? A sweat-smart Mumbai goon with a heart of cool falls for a beautiful DJ, channels India's most popular ghost, M.K. Gandhi, a dulcet-voiced spirit who proceeds to help him not only win the girl, but also a radio quiz, charm an assortment of eccentric old coots, tame real estate corruption, and come up with a new mantra for 21st century socio-political redemption. Gandhigiri, a jaunty Indian colloquialism meaning doing it like Gandhi. I'm referring, as many of you know, to the smash hit 2007 film Lage Raho Munna Bhai, or Carry On Munna Bhai. This film, in case you don't understand the hearts mean, it's basically a love story, was watched and applauded by millions of South Asian and international audiences and rekindled popular interest in that frail old man and his philosophy machine. Gandhigiri, or doing it like Gandhi, was again something that seemed to matter to Indians everywhere. But what does it mean to do it like Gandhi? What is doing it when it comes to Gandhi, so famously an espouser of celibacy? Who was he? Who was he and why does he matter? This is what I intend to explore with you today. This talk, Great Saint or Great Schemer, exploring the myth of Mahatma Gandhi, will discuss a small selection of the innumerable historical issues which have made Gandhi such a controversial and universal figure of remembrance, not just in South Asia, but all over the world. Almost everyone, everywhere has a use for Gandhi. Gandhi isn't just one of the great Indian dead. He's a signifier, a symbol, a martyr, a punching bag, an anchor for polarized rhetoric on issues ranging from engineering to enemas. Seriously, this is not because I like alliterating. Even the good people at Apple once drafted the image of Gandhi to illustrate their business USP. Think different. Gandhi, for most of the past century, has been up for grabs. He's become abstract, postmodern, post-national even. No longer a man in and of his time, but a free-floating artifice that is a part of the available stock of global cultural symbols, an image that can be borrowed, used, distorted, reinvented, and strategically deployed to many and any different purpose. If anything, I think, Gandhi's image would have better been advertised not with Apple, but with Adobe Photoshop, the software that alters any image to fit individual demand. For the greater majority of the world, knowledge about Gandhi does not come via historical scholarship, but through cultural products. The topmost conveyor of impressions about the man is possibly Richard Attenborough's 1982 epic biographical film, Gandhi. Not just a film, but as you can see, indeed, a world event. The movie made about $25 million in just the US video and DVD rental circuit. This much Oscared movie is an excellent example of what I'd call ahistorical saint-making. Here we're shown Gandhi as Asian guru, purveying that very fashionable product, the wisdom of the East. And Gandhi as Christ, dying and before that frequently suffering so that others might live. His philosophy of non-violence seemed to work by embarrassing the British into leaving. Freedom could be won, the film appeared to suggest, by being more moral than your oppressor. Such was the efficacy of this symbolic Gandhi that the film, for all its simplifications and Hollywoodizations, had a powerful effect on many contemporary freedom struggles. South African anti-apartheid campaigners, and democratic voices all over South America have broadcast their enthusiasm about the film's galvanizing effects. Gandhi, rather than Mark Zuckerberg, may have been the presiding deity of the more recent Arab Spring. His techniques of resistance fully absorbed by the demonstrators who preyed unflinchingly on the Qasr al-Nil in Cairo as they were assaulted by Hosni Mubarak's water cannons. This posthumous, exalted, international Gandhi has become a totem of real inspirational force. Less compelling than Attenborough's film, but also robust in quantity, are the number of cultural products in what I can only describe as the tabloid genre, which have exploited the market for Gandhian exposés, endlessly reconstructing his unnormative sexuality without much regard for evidence or perspective. Former New York Times executive editor and Pulitzer Prize winner, not for this book, I must point out, Joseph Lelyvel's 2011 book, Great Soul, Mahatma Gandhi and His Struggle with India, spawned a veritable tsunami of disgust amongst Gandhi followers and was banned in India, which meant, of course, it's sold widely. The author concluded that Gandhi was, quote unquote, a sexual weirdo and is best remembered as such. This much debated publication is a great instance of the lack of nuance and knee-jerk sensibilities that mark both the saint-making and the carping, cavilling, snide machinery of representation that surrounds Gandhi. The possibility of a subtle discussion on Gandhi's failures and successes is usually overshadowed by his immense and immensely elastic legend. Within scholarship, particularly in the genre of historical biography, Gandhi was bestowed with saintly status only after India's independence and his own assassination in 1948. There is a very small body of balanced, advanced scholarship which tethers itself to developments in theory or the discipline-specific sophistication in history to mine the vast Gandhi archive and critically approach historical questions about what drove or shaped Gandhi and how that in turn shaped and drove in nationalism in India. Writing that has cross-disciplinary reference, hermeneutical interpretation, or theoretical innovation is particularly rare. This is something of a surprise, given that India's scholars seem to endlessly refer to Gandhi. More generally, the trouble with the idealized Gandhi of Attenborough's film and other unilaterally saint-making or demonizing representations of the man in several thousand blogs, films, articles, and associations even devoted to him is that more than the problems of scholarship and historical veracity, Gandhi is rendered just so damned dull. Little more than a dispenser of homilies and nostrums, an eye for an eye will make the whole world go blind. With the odd flash of wit, when asked what he thought of Western civilization, he gave the celebrated reply, "I think it would be a great idea." Or just a sexual pervert, that old guy who slept with virgins. The real man, if it is still possible to use such a term after the generations of hagiography and reinvention, was infinitely more interesting. One of the most complex and contradictory personalities of the 20th century. His full name even, Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, was memorably and literally translated into English by the novelist G.V. Dasani as Action Slave Fascination Moongrocer. And he was just as rich and devious as that glorious translation suggests. In the, I think, 40-odd minutes we have together, and I hope they will be spectacularly odd, given the man we're going to look at, let's unpack some of the controversial anchors of Gandhi's own life and actions, Gandhi's own Gandhigiri, as it were. For nothing more than the exigencies of time, my talk will be organized along 2 points. The first is Gandhi and his political philosophy, and secondly, Gandhi, gender, and sexuality, that more literal sense of doing it like Gandhi. So, on to his political philosophy. Genius, utopian, fantasist. Disclaimer, I don't answer that. So here I will trace briefly Gandhi's vital interventions in political ideology. There are two ideas, I think. These are the ideas of self-rule or Swaraj and Satyagraha, which is very loosely translated as a pursuit of truth. Gandhi's most cogent ideas about his political vision, I believe, were articulated most powerfully in the booklet Hind Swaraj, which he wrote in 1909 on a 10-day ship journey from London to South Africa. Gandhi's purpose in writing the book was, he wrote, to serve my country, to find the truth and to follow it. Hind Swaraj, the only work incidentally that Gandhi translated himself, remained the touchstone of his beliefs and actions throughout his life. Fundamentally, Gandhi's Hind Swaraj is a critique of the entire intellectual scaffolding of modern civilization. Science, history, political and social institutions, all of it. This realm, outside of modern civilization, is where Gandhi saw India's real potential for challenging the corrupt imperial system that was impoverishing her. Real or genuine civilization, in Gandhi's words, in contrast to what is known as civilization, was to be found in the villages of India, which Gandhi saw as an unadulterated antidote to the immorality and violence embedded in modern civilization, spawned by the avaricious tentacles of the Industrial Revolution in the West. According to Gandhi, in the traditional village world of India, life was governed by a common morality, by which each member performed his duty. This made it the exact opposite of modern society, whose members chased their own self-interested and individualistic goals. The challenge to modern civilization in India, and by the same logic, the entire edifice of colonial control, would have to come from the people who lived in the villages, the peasantry. And how was this challenge to be articulated? Gandhi was emphatic that it would have to be won through non-violence. For Gandhi, the reason for this is interesting. Since the peasantry would be at the forefront of resistance, it had to be non-violent, since according to Gandhi, peasants themselves are essentially so. In Hind Swaraj, he wrote, they, the peasants, do not know the use of the sword, and they are frightened by the use of it by others. We cease to cooperate with our rulers when they displease us. This is passive resistance. This problematic, reduced essentialism of the native innocence of Indian peasants would explode in Gandhi's own face with the events of Chauri Chaura in 1922. What happened there was a mob of Indian villagers attacked and burnt a police station in a North Indian city, killing 22 policemen in Gandhi's name. This forced Gandhi to suspend the non-cooperation movement and court arrest. Gandhi was in jail for 2 years. The historian Shahid Amin's work within the subaltern studies framework recovers the voices and the subjectivity of those rebelling peasants whose internalization of the Gandhi myth harmonized extreme violence with satyagraha, or the pursuit of truth. Gandhi himself expressed considerable frustration and unhappiness with the Chauri Chaura incident and the tumultuous Gandhi-worshipping fanaticism which preceded that event. But the distance between Gandhi's message and its reception is a very important moment of historical intervention. Gandhi's message clearly meant very different things to different arms of his own constituency. Now, what is satyagraha? Variously translated as truth force, a search for truth, or simply non-violent nationalist resistance, expressed the core substance of Gandhi's political ideology. In his own words, satyagraha was the force which is born of truth and love of non-violence. Self-rule, the pursuit of truth force, and nation building were connected in the Gandhian vision. Swaraj as self-rule or self-government was an ideal for the individual but also for the nation. Gandhi, however, laid down a very strict code of conduct for anyone who chose the path of true Swaraj. According to him, only by observing perfect chastity, adopting poverty, following truth, and cultivating fearlessness would truth be pursued. To Gandhi, without this, any alternative where Western institutions of governance in civil society would be run by Indians would simply be a superficial English rule without the Englishman, he said. Gandhi's social vision, the end goal of Satyagraha, was articulated as the idea of Ram Rajya, or the ideal kingdom of the god Rama, the central figure of the Sanskrit epic, the Ramayana. Referring to the Indian struggle for independence, he wrote, "Independence in my conception means nothing less than the realization of the kingdom of God within you and on this earth." Some of you will detect the influences of Tolstoy here. "I would rather work for and die in the pursuit of this dream, though it may never be realized." Gandhi's social vision, this kingdom of God, or Ram Rajya, contained 6 characteristics which ranged from interpersonal relations to international relations. And I'll just walk you through them very, very quickly. The first was not just Swaraj, but Purna Swaraj, or complete self-rule. The second, Swadeshi, which meant restricting an individual's or an association's needs to what was homegrown, what was available in the community. The third, Panchayati Raj, or local village-based governance, which Gandhi saw as an association of sovereign village republics and a form of pure democracy, not a pyramidal hierarchy, but where everyone voted. Fourthly, enlightened anarchy, and this is clearly, he relates this to his influence by John Ruskin and Tolstoy. Gandhi says, there is a state of enlightened anarchy in the kingdom of God. In such a state, everyone is his own ruler and does not require outside governance. Fifthly, Gandhi was very, very interested in the protection of what in Hinduism is known as the Varnashram, or 4 stages of life system, which entails a distinct set of obligations for individuals. The stages of human life progress from the duties inherent in being a student. Interestingly, Hindu philosophy assumes that students are celibate, to those duties expected of a householder who had to work and maintain a family, and then to the retiree who would spend increasing time with the study of religion, and finally to the life of the renunciate, the sannyasi, who would spend life detached from worldly pleasures, fully practicing their religion. The final part of this vision was a world federation. The better mind of the world today, Gandhi wrote, desires not absolutely independent states warring against each other, but a federation of friendly interdependent states. I see nothing grand or impossible, Gandhi writes, about our expressing our readiness for universal interdependence than independence. The opposition, the criticism, and obstacles to Gandhi's social vision for independent India came from numerous quarters. Indeed, the man who first hailed Gandhi as Mahatma, the Nobel laureate poet Rabindranath Tagore, did not agree with Gandhi's vision of Ram Rajya. Gandhi's own beloved chosen heir, Jawaharlal Nehru, who would be the first Prime Minister of independent India, publicly claimed that the ideas of Gandhi's Hind Swaraj represented an utterly wrong and harmful doctrine and impossible of achievement. Nehru, who famously described independent India's hydroelectric dams as temples of modernity, openly expressed his horror of Gandhi's valorization of the simple peasant life, claiming, instead of submitting to this myself, I want to drag out even the peasantry from it. Other critics pointed out that Gandhi's concepts were opportunistic. His was a flexible nonviolence, a rather convenient piety. In an interview to Le Monde on 10th February 1932, when asked why, during his negotiations with Lord Irwin in London, he refused to seek pardon for soldiers who, upon responding to Gandhi's own call for non-cooperation, had refused to open fire on a group of peaceful gatherers in Peshawar in 1930, and as a result had to face court-martial, Gandhi replied, "A soldier who disobeys an order to fire breaks the oath which he has taken and renders himself guilty of criminal disobedience." Other historians have pointed out that Gandhian tactics were also highly derivative. The Gandhian vision, romantic as it may be, was not unique to Gandhi. Historian David Hardiman forwards the thesis that non-violent mass protest with a religio-philosophical underpinning existed on Indian soil centuries before Gandhi. Between 1665 and 1669, forced conversions and unfair taxation on a community of Gujarati traders, interestingly the same Banya community to which Gandhi belonged, was resolved by this group's silent mass migration out of the city of Surat. The then Mughal emperor Aurangzeb was forced to accede to the demands of these merchants without a drop of blood being shed anywhere. There are several other examples in the 19th century of non-violent protests to British methods of taxation and other levies in India. Other kinds of scholarship point out too that the term non-violence is simply a direct translation of the ancient Sanskrit term ahimsa, a concept that had been applied mainly before Gandhi's use of it in the context of refusing to carry out animal sacrifices, and by extension not injuring animals in any way. Gandhi gave the concept a political nationalist dimension by extending ahimsa into the sphere of politics. Gandhi thus intervened in the political vocabulary of the English-speaking world and nothing more. Gandhi's philosophy of caste reconciliation is another node of polemical debate. Gandhi's combative relationship with the Dalit or depressed classes leader and jurist B.R. Ambedkar is often seen as critical to his caste position. According to historian Ramachandra Guha, while both Gandhi and Ambedkar fought against the caste system, a form of human taxonomy that is one of the most sophisticated, subtle, and diabolical forms of social exclusion invented by human beings, their approaches were vastly different. Gandhi, an upper caste member of the elite, challenged the caste system from above, protecting the system's pertinence from its highest echelons, while Ambedkar, the 14th child of a Dalit foot soldier in the British Indian Army, challenged it from below. And while Gandhi's views on caste evolved slowly over the years, he remained deeply spiritual and sought social change within Hinduism. Ambedkar, on the other hand, was vocal about the hypocrisy of Gandhi's position, which asked for moral change without enshrining such change in law. He read it as a blatant example of high caste pedantry, simply to introduce a term, Harijans, so just a change in a word, or children of God, and embrace the former untouchable as a special extension of the Almighty, which was Gandhi's position. The bitter dispute between Ambedkar and Gandhi had originated in the 1930s when Gandhi mounted one of his famous fast unto deaths in response to a British proposal based on Ambedkar's recommendations to award the depressed classes a separate electorate in the Indian Parliament. Gandhi used his favored tactic of a hunger strike to push forward his own Harijan terminology agenda. Gandhi believed that his personal willingness to die would awaken Hindus to the poison of untouchability. Indeed, for a while following Gandhi's great fast, scores of communities removed barriers to untouchables, attending temples and drinking water and eating with each other. Frantic negotiations under the pressure of saving Gandhi's life resulted in the Pune Pact, with complex provisions elaborated in it, which now guaranteed parliamentary seats instead of a separate electorate, which appeared to many to deny untouchables any real access to power. Ambedkar later said publicly that he signed under immense pressure as Gandhi's health was failing in the public eye. And in a 1955 interview, while referring to that incident, Ambedkar called Gandhi manipulative and undeserving of the title of great soul or Mahatma. Gandhi's own writings, however, seem to indicate that he didn't see political solutions per se as fundamental and lasting, not just for the caste question, but for anything. He sought instead moral and spiritual paths. He wanted Hindus to atone and redeem the sin of untouchability. Gandhi was concerned that being politically separated from the issue through separate electorates would leave Hindus without the motivation to create the necessary change of heart, which Gandhi saw as permanent. Now let's move on to Gandhi, gender and sexuality. Freethinking radical, misogynist tyrant, who knows? Not me. This is the area where the Gandhian myth receives the maximum flack. Feminist scholarship, as well as the scholarship on gendered elements of Indian nationalism, have approached Gandhi with both enthusiastic approbation and persistent anxiety. It is a fact universally acknowledged, most frequently by Gandhi himself, that to him, sexuality and desire were intimately connected to social life and politics, and that self-control translated directly into power of various kinds, both public and private. Affecting the persona of a world renouncer, Gandhi was able to mix politics, religious and moral power, thus translating personal self-control into radical social criticism and nationalist goals. Gandhi's mass appeal was partly affected on a sort of visceral level at which many Hindu men were able to fully appreciate this logic of celibacy as a means to psychological security, self-improvement, and national reform. In this section, I'm going to talk about Gandhi's repositioning of masculinity, his approach to women's sexuality, and his personal relationships. Let's look at Gandhi's views on women. In her analysis of his speeches and correspondence, historian Madhu Kishwar writes that Gandhi helped women find a new dignity in public life, a new place in the national mainstream, a new confidence, a new self-view, and a consciousness that they could themselves act against oppression. Assessing Gandhi's influence in movements for women's rights in post-colonial India, historian Radha Kumar similarly states that his most important contributions were to legitimize and expand women's public activities in certain ways, extending it so that it cut across class and cultural barriers. But, refining Kishwar's claim, Kumar contends that it has to be acknowledged that Gandhi's views were expressed at a time when women had already begun to find these attributes for themselves, not only in public professional life as doctors, teachers, social workers, etc., but also in public political life, in nationalist and reformist campaigns, as well as in worker and peasant agitations. Both scholars also point out the weaknesses of Gandhi's leadership. As Kishwar says, one of the limitations of Gandhi's thinking was that he sought to change not so much the material condition of women as their moral condition. This is reminiscent of Ambedkar's criticism of Gandhi on the caste question. Gandhi refused to put an economic or legislative content into his conception for emancipation. Gandhi failed to realize that, among other things, oppression is not an abstract moral condition, but a social and historical experience related to production relations. He tried changing women's position without either transforming their relation to the outer world of production or the inner world of family, sexuality, and domestic labor. Gandhi's construction of the ideal Indian woman, I find, is politically shrewd and conceptually illiberal. He projected Indian women as national mothers, as the nurturers of male nationalism, encouraging them to use domestic activities like wheel spinning, vegetarianism, primary education at home, familiarity with Hindu religious texts to support the wider nationalist program. Gandhi encouraged the mothers of India to donate their gold jewelry and come out into their household yards or gardens at a set time during the day to clatter together kitchen utensils as if in a loud clarion call of nationalist solidarity. This is a very clever proposition. It does not ask for blood or guts in the way that romantic nationalists around Gandhi were demanding. We remember Subhash Chandra Bose's famous war cry, "Give me blood and I will give you freedom." That requires enormous sacrifice. But clang your spoons together and I will give you nationalist redemption is really much easier, and therefore was a much more popular option. But what does it do for advancing independence for women? Gandhi's position on this, like many other things, is joyously foggy. In a 1921 article in his paper Young India, he censured Hindu practices detrimental to women's well-being and demanded women's suffrage and juridical equality. He wrote, "I passionately desire the utmost freedom for our women. I detest child marriages. I shudder to see a child widow and shiver with rage. When a husband just widowed with brutal indifference contracts another marriage, I deplore the criminal indifference of parents who keep their daughters utterly ignorant and illiterate and bring them up only for the purpose of marrying them off to some young men of means. Notwithstanding all this grief and rage, I realize the difficulty of the problem. Women must have votes and an equal legal status." Now, progressive as his views read, this passage demonstrates a classic tension in Gandhi's politics. Adopting an emotive moralistic tone laden with "I detest, I shudder, I deplore, I shiver with rage," Gandhi is just reconstituting the authority of the enlightened Hindu male political subject, outraged by the cruelties perpetrated on their women. This is not very different from other Indian nationalist philosophies of the time and before that played out the struggles of male identity on the turf of women's subjectivities. The famous Bharat Mata or Mother India brand of nationalist personification, which is so well critiqued by South Asian feminist scholarship as being reductive, hypocritical, misogynist, and delusory, was just a less articulate brand of Gandhi's own shuddering and deploring. And it's not even particularly Indian at that. The projects of Britannia, La Madre Patria in Peru, Mother Russia, or the French nationalist imaginary of Marianne reflect the same conflation of male prerogative with vicarious female redemption. But where is Gandhi's contribution unique? I believe it is to be found in his discomfort with normative sexuality, specifically as we watch it being played out through his personal reconfiguration of Indian masculinity. A quick word on the crisis of colonial masculinity, in which environment Gandhigiri intervenes. He doesn't agree. From the second half of the 19th century, as British rule consolidated over South Asia, it spawned a period of anxiety, triggered by the post-1857 uprising stigma of un-British effeminacy which was heaped on Indian men. Formulating indigenous reform in the image of Victorian Britain necessitated distinction from any dissimilar contemporary stereotypes. And the majority of scholarship of this period has read Indian social history as one where elite male nationalists, in intellectual harmony with the British upper classes, collectively labored towards shunning pre-colonial entanglements with the earthy and the sexual and the sensual from every sphere of life. In this program of national recasting, celibacy reared its, let's say, ugly head. As a source of masculine re-empowerment, Gandhi, though he never acknowledged this, was an inheritor of this process. Celibacy had long been valorized in India as a cultural ideal for upper-class Hindu men and was popularly advocated as a phase in the life cycle so that a temporary abstention from loss of the life-giving fluid that was semen could ascribe its more productive qualities for superior political and physical tasks. Describing these choices as semen anxiety, historian Joseph Alter has demonstrated how Gandhian politics gave celibacy really a new charge and how Pehelwan or male wrestlers in North India even today practice celibacy to fortify their bodies. See how well it works. There is no man who would not aspire to this model. The logic of celibacy or brahmacharya is worked out on a level of primal fear of female sexuality. The ideal woman in these discourses is cast as mother, daughter, sister, and beleaguered national symbol, Mother India, so as to prevent depletion of the quote-unquote male essence. I find Gandhi's casting of himself as father of the nation, devotee of his wife Kasturba, who he portrayed as a national mother figure, and then in later life, Gandhi's recasting himself as the mother of his young female inner circle, the nieces he slept next to, expresses intermediate attitudes within the spectrum of nationalist responses to the crisis of colonial masculinity, which deserves much closer attention than it's had. Well, why don't we take a good look at Gandhi? See how he evolves. See, his garb of the semi-naked Indian beggar is not just a statement of class solidarity. It's also a very conscious demasculization of the self through a privileging of infantile attitudes. His beatific smile, his beatific, in fact, gap-toothed smile, twinkling eyes, frail physique, bald, uncovered head, are reminiscent of another figure with whom Gandhi is very rarely equated. Years before Gandhi entered the political fray, in late 19th century Bengal, the capital of British India, celibacy had received another fresh lease of life, with the activities of the so-called mad priest of the Dakshineshwar Kali temple, Sri Ramakrishna. Just as Gandhi came to be known as Mahatma or Great Soul, this charismatic Kali worshipper there, Sri Ramakrishna was hailed as Paramhamsa, or conqueror of self. So avowedly did this priest detest the female body with its regular bleedings and sticky sexual heat that he never consummated his own marriage and worshipped his wife Sharoda as the divine mother. This is an image from a child's comic book available currently, which valorizes the process of a man worshipping his wife as mother. Sri Ramakrishna had an enormous following amongst Bengali nationalists then and Bengalis today. And his childlike behavior, emotional displays, dressing in loincloth, divinely inspired tantrums, provided a redemptive space where colonial masculinity could thrive by issuing the political culture that demanded manliness in such a taxing idiom. Ramakrishna's most famous disciple, Swami Vivekananda's call for sexual abstinence as a means to germinate a nation of robust heroes, in many ways anticipated Gandhi's more ambitious and more public propaganda later on. Eccentricity, infantilization of self, sublimation of sexuality into prayer, and a celebration of an almost childlike androgynous body allowed such men to carve out a site of escape. This strategic deployment of gender identity may bring to our mind Judith Butler's contention that gender is a kind of imitation for which there is no original. In fact, it is a kind of imitation that produces the very notion of the original as an effect and consequence of the imitation itself. What they imitate is a phantasmic ideal of heterosexual identity. Now, Gandhi's own discomfort with the sexual life, according to one widely accepted strand of thought, commenced when Gandhi's father passed away shortly after his marriage to Kasturba. Though the young Gandhi dutifully nursed his ailing father, one evening as he was having sex with the then pregnant Kasturba, his father died. Gandhi was, it has been argued, never able to forgive himself this transgression, and he became determined to master his sexual drive, seeing physical desire as the root of all evil. A more complex narrative links his renunciation of sex to his firm conviction, first developed during the campaign of nonviolent resistance to oppression in South Africa, that it compromised his ability to pursue truth as his life's ideal, indeed Satyagraha. Gandhi's assertion that he was cured of his various quote-unquote stupidities and learnt the lesson of non-violence from his wife's determined resistance and quiet submission notwithstanding, historians and biographers have tended to treat Kasturba, you see her there, Gandhi's wife for 60 years, as an addendum to the text of Mahatma's life. She is the eternal camp follower, a footnote in history. Arun Gandhi, their grandson, telling the story of his grandmother, argues that the making of the Mahatma could not have been possible without Kasturba, or Ba, as Gandhi affectionately but also tellingly addressed her. Ba means mother. Born into a wealthy Orthodox family in 1869, married at the age of 13, Kasturba's story is one of constant dislocation. From Porbandar to Pretoria, to a mud hut in Natal, to ashrams in Sabarmati and Wardha in India, seeing her family jailed, accompanying them, and then herself finally dying in jail, Kasturba moved far from everything that was familiar to her. The story of her life and the stages of her changing interaction with Gandhi, moving through bewilderment, opposition, acceptance, conversion, and championship, are very well documented by their grandson Arun Gandhi, who wrote that while Mohandas Gandhi experimented with the truth, Kasturba lived it. In Gandhi's autobiography, he speaks about how he imposed upon Kasturba his radical ideas about celibacy, the simple life, and the removal of untouchability. I was a cruelly kind husband, writes Gandhi. I regarded myself as her teacher, and so harassed her out of my blind love for her. In his 70s, in the sunset of his life, Gandhi embarked on a new set of sexual experiments that brought in some of the most virulent waves of criticism and alienated some of his closest followers. In these experiments, in which several women partook, among them his nieces Manu and Abha, his two walking sticks, and Sushila Nair, his personal physician and sister of his secretary, were all part of these experiments. Now, in the midst of raging communal violence, which Gandhi characteristically attributed to his own personal shortcomings, he decided to test his resolve by going to bed naked with one or the other of these women. His detractors have since had a field day. The mask is supposed to have been lifted from the dirty old man. But what's interesting is that his niece, Manu, wrote a book titled Bapu, My Mother, stating that far from experiencing any sexual desire, she felt as though she was sharing the bed with her mother. Manu's memoirs reproduce letters from Gandhi, a part of which is reproduced on the frontispiece. I wonder if you can read that. It says, "Have I not become your mother? I have been father to many, but only to you am I a mother." She also writes of various occasions where Gandhi chastises her for various little transgressions, expressing his worries as her mother. For me as a historian, it's not so much whether or not Gandhi had sex with these young women that's important here. Scholars have really missed a trick with not exploring Gandhi's professed motherhood in this equation. Reconfiguring Gandhi as mother is a potentially audacious and permeable site of desire which may require a conscientious effort to articulate heterogeneity in the subjective meanings and social practices of anti-colonial nationalism. To unleash the hybridity of this queer mothering so that its cultural values and sexual fantasies find no common center would promote an understanding of nationalist space that does not disregard the social importance of the familial and the local, the otherwise normative spaces which aren't critiqued that much. But scholarship on Indian nationalism has not mined this potential yet, not even in critiquing the ideological hierarchy embedded in this male nationalist appropriation, co-option, and fetishization of motherhood. Nationalist myths surrounding Sri Ramakrishna, the priest of the Dakshineshwar Kali temple, the mad saint of Bengal, for instance, even claim that he used to lactate when faced with a hungry infant. Now, the celibate Gandhi is as much a conundrum as any other Gandhi we have known. The vow of celibacy or brahmacharya did not preclude, as it had for reformers and saints in the Indian religious traditions, the company of women. Indeed, Gandhi wrote openly that he adored the presence of women and reveled in their touch. He was constantly surrounded by women, and for decades, Meera Bain, top left, the daughter of an English admiral and Gandhi, kept up an erotic correspondence which can only be described as the earliest example of sexting. There was an intense exchange of love letters over many years between him and Esther Faring, in the middle there, a Danish missionary, and the Bengali nationalist Sarala Devi Chaudhurani, who Gandhi cast as his spiritual wife. Many of his male friendships were equally intense. For example, his much debated one with Hermann Kallenbach, a very wealthy Jewish architect who would become one of Gandhi's earliest patrons and closest friends. Lelyvel's expose-style book, which I referred to earlier, highlights the potentially homosexual components of this relationship. A similar conundrum is Gandhi's admission of the social equality of the sexes. Gandhi's speeches and writings during the cataclysmic violence of the partition riots in 1946 to 47 on the subject of the violence against women reveal how Gandhi himself struggled to address the gender pathology that was at the heart of South Asian society, a pathology to which men were subject but of which women were the victims. Gandhi's responses to the intimate violence women endured in the communal conflicts of 46 to 47 were diverse and fraught with contradiction. At one extreme was his advice to the Hindu women raped in the riots of 1946 to commit suicide by poison or to suffocate themselves or bite their tongues to end their lives to avoid dishonor. At the other end, Gandhi urged the social rehabilitation of abducted Hindu and Sikh women recently repatriated from Pakistan, comparing these women to his nieces Manu and Abha. He wrote, "If one of those recovered women should come to me, then I will give them as much respect and honor as I accord to these young maidens." Gandhi's use of the term maidens in his laudatory comparison is interesting, since it valorizes virginity as the essential female virtue. Yet majority of abducted women during the pre-partition riots were either raped or fell into sexual relations with their abductors. Gandhi has no accommodative space for the contradictions between physical purity and moral virtue. Far from being able to provide a liberal definition of purity itself, Gandhi claims that chastity and purity are literal, they're physical facts, and that the annihilation of physical purity is something so catastrophic that it ought to be resisted by the preemptive annihilation of the body itself. Bodily purity is, in this Gandhian discourse, a physical property of which the woman is a guardian, but which can be physically taken from her permanently by any single act of force. Gandhi himself, however, never doubted that all Indian women were enthusiastic about his political program of establishing a kingdom of God populated by pure women and dutiful men. Ram Rajya. The political utopia that he believed assured its subjects of harmonious community. And yet, the kingdom of Rama, from the epic Ramayana from which its name was derived, was the place where Rama's wife, the Queen Sita, on the basis of mere suspicions of infidelity, had been banished even after she demonstrated her devotion by undergoing an ordeal of fire. Sita's trial by fire is often recreated in popular Indian cultural products like this tribal Madhumani painting there on the top. In calling for Ram Rajya, the kingdom of Ram, as a desideratum for post-colonial India, Gandhi implicitly endorses a patriarchal despotism, in which even women, pure of mind, shall ever remain banished for faults beyond their capacity of will or intention. Insofar as Gandhi was concerned, Sita's chastity was more than a simple signifier of her moral uprightness. It was also her security against any future violation. Like Sita, Gandhi believed that the Indian woman must pray when faced with sexual violation to guard her body. By way of the proof of the effectiveness of prayer in guarding the body against violation, Gandhi cited the example of Draupadi from another Sanskrit epic, the Mahabharata. This is the incident in the painting below. Draupadi, in the epic Mahabharata, is saved from being disrobed by her husband's enemies, indeed her in-laws, when Lord Krishna responds to her prayers by performing a miracle. The length of the sari wrapping her is made unending, so undressing her is impossible. That's being shown there. In Draupadi's prayers to Krishna to salvage her modesty, Gandhi found a shining example of passive resistance through a surrender of human agency and a placing of trust in the divine. Gandhi ignored entirely Draupadi's own very well-recorded reproach of the husband who could put her in that position in the very first place, and her family elders who presided over that travesty. Moreover, to Gandhi, God's agency was obscured, with grace becoming a function of female devotion and redemption a function of male intervention. This problematic linking of female chastity with prayer in an overtly Hindu religious vein reminded me of the arguments of a lunatic minority of Indian leaders in the wake of the horrific gang rape and murder of the 23-year-old medical student in New Delhi in December 2012. The passive plea of a pure Indian woman was sure to melt the heart of any potential violator. The rapist has no responsibility or culpability in these particular formulations. Despite his intent to venerate Indian women, Gandhian politics itself participated in re-establishing the patriarchal logic whose violent brutality, deep-seated inadequacies, and regressive psychosexual norms continue to infect the way South Asian women are treated even today. Now let's move towards some conclusions. By the turn of the 1940s, the colonial landscape in South Asia was changing. The British, exhausted by the Second World War, were quite keen to get rid of their Indian possessions. Gandhi was being sidelined from Congress politics. His ideas of Swaraj and Satyagraha were being overwhelmed by the communal politics and bloodied fighting in the streets of Calcutta, Delhi, and beyond. Partition was imminent. The hasty retreat of the British led to one of the 20th century's greatest fiascos, the partition of British India in August 1947 into Hindu and Muslim majority states, India, East Pakistan, West Pakistan. The accompanying fratricide, it involved the murder and uprooting of millions of Hindus and Muslims, condemned India and Pakistan to several destructive wars and a debilitating arms race. This was the cruelest blow to Gandhi. Liberation from colonial rule meant little to him if the liberated people did not embody a higher morality of justice and compassion. He spent his last year traveling to the worst hit areas in India, physically placing himself in the midst of the violence to quell it. Appropriately, Gandhi's last major act was a hunger strike protesting the Indian government's attempt to deny Pakistan its due share of resources. By then, as some of Gandhi's biographers wrote, he was a defeated man, longing for death. Having refused all police protection, he was shot dead in January 1948 by a self-professed Hindu patriot, Nathuram Godse, who feared that Gandhi's faith in such irrational ideas, according to Godse, like individual conscience, would prevent independent India from pursuing its national interest with full military vigor. When Gandhi died, The same Jawaharlal Nehru, who had publicly criticized Gandhi's vision for independent India, poignantly stated, "The light has gone out of our lives." Gandhi's funeral procession was attended by over 2 million distraught followers. So, as we conclude, many of you will rejoice to know, what indeed is Gandhigiri? What might it mean to do it like Gandhi? Gandhi's own legend too often obscures the audacious radicalism of his ideas. These days, few people pause to consider the complex character of Gandhi's personality, the ambiguous nature of his achievement and his legacy, or even the real causes of India's independence. Ours are hurried, sloganizing times, and we don't have the time or the inclination to assimilate multiple perspectives. The harsh truth is that Gandhi is increasingly irrelevant in the very country whose little father, Bapu, he was. As the political analyst Sunil Khilnani pointed out in his book, The Idea of India, India came into being as a secularized state, but Gandhi's vision was essentially religious. However, Gandhi may have recoiled from Hindu nationalism, Gandhi's own solution was to forge an accommodative Indian identity out of a shared body of ancient narratives. But it didn't work. In today's India, divisive Hindu nationalism is rampant. What then is greatness? In what does it reside? If a man's project fails or survives only in irredeemably tarnished form, can the force of his example still merit the superlative accolade of great soul? For Jawaharlal Nehru, the defining image of Gandhi was, and he writes, "As I saw him marching staff in hand to Dandi on the Salt March in 1930, here was the pilgrim on his quest of truth, quiet, peaceful, determined, and fearless, who would continue that quest and pilgrimage regardless of consequences." Nehru's daughter Indira Gandhi later said, "More than his words, his life was his message." These days, that message is better heeded outside India. Einstein was one of many to praise Gandhi's achievement. Martin Luther King Jr., the Dalai Lama, and all the world's peace movements have followed in his footsteps. Gandhi wanted freedom not only from imperial rule, but also from the modern industrial society, whose ways Western imperialists had spread to the remotest corners of the globe. But Gandhi was ultimately forced, much like King Lear, to see the limits of his ambition to remake his own world. How can one square such quasi-Shakespearean tragedy with Gandhi's enduring influence over a wide range of political and social movements? Why does his example continue to accumulate moral power? Gandhi, who gave up cosmopolitanism to gain a country, has become, in this strange afterlife, a citizen of the world. His spirit may yet prove resilient. It's tough, smart, sneaky, and yes, ethical enough to avoid assimilation by the global muck culture and Mac culture too. Against this new empire, Gandhian intelligence might be a better weapon than Gandhian piety. And passive resistance, well, we'll just have to quietly wait and see. Thank you.